Why Marriages Die. Hard truths from counselors, priests, and attorneys. Story 1. Giving up. So many couples hit an inevitable rough patch in their marriage, a period of friction and difficulty that tests their bond. It could be financial stress, a family tragedy, or just the slow erosion of connection over time. But instead of leaning in and working through it together, digging deep to find a solution, they often take what seems like the easier path and simply walk away. More often than not, this decision is fueled by the stubborn pride of one or even both partners who refuse to be the first to bend, to show vulnerability, or to admit their own fault in the matter. That pride becomes a wall between them, and they let the entire relationship, something they built over years, crumble into dust over something that could have been repaired with humility and effort. Comment 1. This particular point bothers me a great deal, mostly because people stand up in front of their friends and family, under lights and surrounded by flowers, and literally say, for better or for worse, in their vows. Yet their later actions prove they clearly don't mean it, or at least didn't understand the weight of those words. It feels so incredibly disingenuous. They would have been more honest if they had just said, I'm with you for the better times, for the laughter and the fun, because if the going ever gets tough, I'm heading for the exit. It would be a brutal and jarring thing to hear at a wedding, but at least it would be the honest truth. Comment 2. And it's the exact same thing when they say, in sickness and in health, in that moment, surrounded by the joy and optimism of the wedding celebration, they're probably picturing taking care of their partner through a bad cold or the seasonal flu. You know, a few sick days that involve bringing soup to the bedside and fluffing pillows. They aren't thinking about the grim, unglamorous reality of a long-term degenerative illness that could completely change their lives forever. An illness that might put their partner in a wheelchair, require constant care, and prevent them from ever being intimate in the same way again. The simple truth is, life is so much harder and more demanding than any of us want to believe during the hopeful bliss of a wedding. Comment 3. My husband and I actually have quite different ideas about what we want to happen in the absolute worst-case scenario. The important thing is, we've had the tough conversations and talked all about it in detail, even though it was uncomfortable and morbid. For example, in the case of a severe traumatic injury that leaves me with no quality of life, I've made it crystal clear that I do not want to be a brain-dead vegetable kept alive by machines. My wishes are to have every organ they can possibly harvest from me taken out and given to someone who needs it. My personal philosophy is, waste not, want not. He, on the other hand, while also not wanting to be kept alive on machines, has expressed that he doesn't really want to be an organ donor. I know these are all morbid, scary details that most people who are deeply in love don't even want to allow into their minds. But knowing these fundamental wishes is an incredibly important part of being truly partnered with someone. Comment 4. I'm genuinely curious. Can you explain his views on not being an organ donor? I honestly don't quite get why a person would choose not to be one, so I'm interested in the reasoning behind it if you're comfortable sharing. Comment 5. So, I asked him to elaborate on his feelings for me. He says that for him, it's mostly a deeply personal feeling that these organs are his, they are a part of his physical identity, and not anyone else's. This is the body he was born with, the one that has carried him through his entire life, and that's kind of how he'd like to leave the world, whole and as he was made. So, I think it's partly that ick factor for him too, a discomfort with the idea of his body being dismantled. And as he sometimes jokes to lighten the mood, he's just not willing to share, haha. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here with a completely different mindset thinking, heck with it, I won't need it anymore. You want my eyeballs? Have them. Need a kidney? Alrighty then, it's all yours. I'm also on the bone marrow registry because the thought that I could have helped someone, that I had the biological tools to save a life and chose not to, is something that I just hate. Comment 6. Seriously, this topic hits close to home. My neighbor's daughter went through a horrendous divorce that perfectly illustrates this failure of vows. She was fairly young, in her early 30s if I recall correctly, and was pregnant with her first child when she received the devastating world-shattering diagnosis of breast cancer. Her husband's reaction was to say that he couldn't take the stress of watching her die, and so he just packed his bags and left her. This poor woman, already terrified and facing her own mortality, had to endure the lonely journey of pregnancy, the grueling and toxic chemotherapy treatments, and a physically and emotionally scarring mastectomy, all completely alone. She had no partner to hold her hand during appointments, to comfort her when she was sick, or to just sit with her in the quiet, terrifying nights. She's doing okay now, thankfully, and has been cancer-free for a few years, but holy cow! I can't even begin to imagine the strength that took. It's probably one of the hardest things in the world to watch a loved one be that sick, but to ask for a divorce at that exact moment? That's literally the in sickness and in health part you signed up for. That is the ultimate test. I realize this is an extreme example, but it highlights a common tragic issue. There are so many people who just seem to think marriage is always going to be easy, and they simply can't deal with it when it's not. Comment 7. That story, while awful and infuriating, doesn't surprise me one bit. And it's not because men are biologically cowards or anything simplistic like that, but because our society heavily socializes women from a young age to be the caretakers, the nurturers. The flip side of that coin is the harmful and pervasive stereotype that men who take on primary caretaking roles are somehow weak, unmasculine, or even gay. Think about our cultural programming. A female nurse is seen as normal and good, but a male nurse is often viewed as an anomaly or with suspicion. A woman doing the cooking at home is fulfilling her role, but a man doing the daily cooking is seen as odd, unless, of course, they're professional chefs earning prestige and a lot of money for it, a field which is, surprise, overwhelmingly dominated by men. Like all the other sexist stereotypes about women that I can think of, there's usually an equal and opposite sexist stereotype about men, and they both suck for everyone involved, limiting our humanity. It's so deeply frustrating. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people make excuses for men who bail on their hospital visiting responsibilities with the flimsy, pathetic reason that men don't like hospitals, as if anyone does. Nobody likes the smell of antiseptic, the sight of suffering, the palpable feeling of anxiety in the air. Do you seriously think you're special because you don't like being in a place full of sickness and sadness? It's not about liking it. It's about responsibility and love. Just show up anyway. Story 2. If you ever want to see this in action, just roll on over to the relationships subreddit sometime to get the full, sickening treatment of just how many people seem ready to recommend divorce because their spouse made one bad joke or had a rough day at work and got a little snippy. And what's even worse is the immediate, overwhelming wave of comments offering enthusiastic support for leaving them over such a minor, human transgression. Seriously, it feels really messed up and disconnected from reality. For me, more than all the dramatic stories of cheating, it's the sheer number of people who are just like, "He was rude to me one time, so it's over," that genuinely has me afraid of the idea of long-term commitment in today's world. Comment 1. I hear this criticism of the relationships subreddit often, and I have some of my own criticisms as well. But in defense of the community, I do have to say that I find that most of the posts are actually about people who probably should break up. The situations are rarely as simple as a one-time rude comment. When you read closely, you realize that usually it's either because the original poster is deeply and consistently miserable. They wouldn't be posting online to a forum of strangers if they weren't at their wits' end, and or their significant other is not just a little rude on occasion, but is described as being habitually emotionally abusive or fundamentally untrustworthy over a long period. Comment 2. I usually find that the reason people react so strongly and jump to break up in the relationships subreddit is because of how the stories are often structured. The original poster will write a long, detailed story, maybe 3 full paragraphs, about how god-awful their partner is at doing the dishes. They'll detail every little annoyance, every plate left on the counter. And then, buried in one brief, almost offhanded sentence at the very end of the novel, they'll mention something truly awful and revealing, something metaphorical like, "Oh, and by the way, my significant other also kicks puppies and steals candy from kids. naturally the people reading the post who have waded through the mundane complaints pick up on that one horrific line, and immediately, and rightfully, jump on the "oh my God, you need to leave them immediately" train. Comment 3. There was a post recently that perfectly illustrates this exact phenomenon. The original poster came on asking for advice on how to rehome her cat without upsetting her boyfriend. It sounded like a simple, sad dilemma. But as the story unfolded in the comments, it turned out that the real reason she felt she had to rehome the cat was because her boyfriend had a terrifying habit of kicking the poor animal whenever he got mad. That was already a huge red flag and a sign of a deeply disturbed individual. But then she very casually tossed in the fact that he had recently become physically aggressive with her, shoving her hard across the room when she tried to object to his cruelty towards the cat. Even more chilling, she mentioned in a later comment that their previous cat had died under very suspicious circumstances that seemed directly related to his explosive anger. And yet, she sincerely thought her main problem was just figuring out how to find a new home for the current cat. Her sense of normalcy was so distorted. She had been so mentally and emotionally beaten down by this horrible person that she couldn't see the immense danger she was in and how far and fast she needed to run from him. Reading stories like that on the relationships subreddit can be really, really depressing. Comment 4. True story. I'm always morbidly fascinated by the posts about genuinely gross and unhygienic habits. How on earth can anyone stay with a person who doesn't ever bathe or brush their darn teeth? It truly boggles my mind. The lack of self-respect is one thing, but the complete disregard for their partner is another. I remember one post from a girl who was complaining about getting constant and painful urinary tract infections and yeast infections because her boyfriend simply never showered. He was bringing all sorts of bacteria into their intimate life. To make matters so much worse, he would then complain about being grossed out by her natural feminine scent when they were trying to be intimate, a level of hypocrisy that is just staggering. It hurts my head to even try and comprehend that dynamic. And then there was that infamous story about the guy whose girlfriend apparently had a fetish involving bodily waste. He wrote that he would get out of the shower feeling clean, and when he would go into their shared bedroom, he would always smell something foul and poopy, but his girlfriend would deny it, making him feel like he was going crazy. He later discovered, to his horror, that she was engaging in her fetish and then leaving unhygienic messes on the carpet under their bed. It was so out there and bizarre, I'm still not sure if that was a made-up story or not, but it speaks to the wild things people will put up with. Comment 5. Yeah. The examples of kicking puppies and stealing candy from kids are obviously metaphors for seriously bad deal-breaking behavior. Why should anyone be expected to tolerate things like actual abuse, cruelty, or profound disrespect? I find that many people who have been in abusive relationships, or at the very least, have been in some kind of warped and psychologically strange relationship, tend to downplay the parts of the story that people with a normal, healthy sense of boundaries would find absolutely shocking and reprehensible. They lose perspective on what is acceptable human behavior. Comment 6. My biggest pet peeve and personal criticism of that forum is the classic phrasing that appears in what feels like 90% of the posts. It always starts something like this: I'm using a throwaway account for this because I don't know if my fiancé uses Reddit, but some of his friends might. Anyway, my fiancé, who we'll call Alex, it's just so funny and formulaic, as if someone who knows them is going to read the very specific, detailed story about Alex's unique and terrible behavior and think, wait a minute, I know this couple. But your fiancé's name isn't Alex. And you don't even have any post history on this account. This must be a clever fake. Poppycock. Comment 7. On that note about vows, I also don't think people should even say for better or for worse anymore because its meaning has been so twisted. I see so many stories where people, both husbands and wives, seem to take it as a free pass to completely let themselves go and disrespect the partnership. It becomes their justification. Now I can completely stop trying, turn into a heavy drinker, stop working, and run up a huge credit card bill in your name because, hey, you said for better or for worse, and this is the worst part. I think it would be far more appropriate and genuinely meaningful for modern vows to say something like, "We acknowledge that problems and hardships will inevitably arise, and we promise to face them together as a unified front." That's much closer to what the vow is supposed to mean in the first place. A promise of teamwork, not a permission slip for bad behavior. Story 3. I found a post online recently that really hit home for me. Because it came into my life at a time when my husband and I were having some very serious troubles. We were stuck in a cycle of arguing and resentment, and it felt like the love was gone. The post went like this. My high school teacher once posed a question to our class, a question that has stuck with me ever since. She looked at all of us and asked, "Is love a feeling? Or is it a choice?" We were all just a bunch of teenagers, full of hormones and romantic notions from movies. Naturally, every single one of us passionately argued that love was a feeling. It was that magical butterflies in your stomach sensation. She smiled a knowing, gentle smile and said that if we clung to that belief, we would probably never have a truly lasting relationship of any sort. To prove her point, she gave us a project. We had to go out and interview a dozen adults who were or had been married. We had to ask them all about their marriages, what made them work, what challenges they faced, and for those who were divorced, what made it fail. At the very end of each interview, I asked every single person that same simple question. Is love a feeling or a choice? To my surprise, every single person who was still in a long-term successful marriage said it was a choice. It was a conscious commitment. It was an action. It was something you choose to make work every single day, with a person who has chosen to do the same thing for you. They all said that at some point in their marriage, sometimes for long stretches, the exciting feeling of love had vanished or faded into the background, and they weren't always happy. They explained that feelings are like the weather, always changing and totally unpredictable, and you simply cannot build something that is meant to last a lifetime on such a shaky and unreliable foundation. The ones who were still married said that when things got bad, when they felt distant and angry, they actively chose to open the lines of communication. Even when it was the hardest thing to do. They chose to sit down and identify what exactly was broken between them and figure out how to fix it, together. Like a team of mechanics working on a beloved car, they chose to work together to recreate something that was worth falling in love with all over again. The divorced ones, on the other hand, admitted that when they were faced with that same emptiness and disconnection, they chose to walk away. They saw the end of the feeling as the end of the relationship. Ever since that class, since that eye-opening project, I have never looked at relationships the same way. I finally understood why some arranged marriages can be so successful over time. I discovered the profound, life-altering difference between fleeting feelings and a solid daily commitment. Since then, in my own life, I've never gone for the person who just makes my heart flutter or my head spin with infatuation. Instead, I've chosen the people who were committed to choosing me, the ones who were dedicated to the work of finding something to adore in me, even on my ugliest, most difficult days. And so, I no longer fear the day that someone who once swore I was their entire universe can no longer see the stars in my eyes, as long as they still choose to keep looking day after day. Until they find them again. I have no idea where this story originally came from, or who the wise person was who first wrote it, but reading it gave both my husband and me a completely new and desperately needed perspective. I want to thank whoever wrote it. It became the metaphorical slap in the face that I needed to actually start fighting for my marriage and quit being so proud and blind. I realized with a painful clarity that he wasn't the only one at fault. I had been contributing to the breakdown with my own stubbornness and silence. Since that day, we have both quit trying to blame the other and started to focus more on our marriage itself, as a third entity that we are both responsible for nurturing. We focus on how to work out what was damaging it. Our relationship still isn't perfect, and probably never will be, but we both vowed to each other to fight for it, to choose to love each other in the good days and the bad, and in sickness and in health. We choose it every day. Comment 1. I asked my dad that same question once. He was married to my mom for almost 30 years before he passed away, and he had a much shorter, failed marriage before he met her, so he had seen both sides. He thought for a moment and said that at first, love is absolutely a feeling. It's an overwhelming, involuntary chemical reaction. But over the long term, he said, it is definitely a choice, but not always. He explained that you choose to stay committed and do the work of loving someone even during the times when you aren't actively in love with them. But a healthy relationship should still have many moments where you experience that profound feeling of love throughout your life together, just not all the time, every single day. Comment 2. To tie into this idea, I read somewhere that one of the most important things for a lasting, happy marriage is managing to have low expectations. This sounds unromantic, but it makes sense. If you go into a marriage expecting to be gloriously, Hollywood movie happy all the time, you'll feel like a failure and want to bail the moment the going gets rough. But if you expect occasional rough times, if you know that conflict and boredom and frustration are a normal part of any long-term journey, you'll be able to weather those storms much better when they arrive. At my cousin's wedding, the priest actually warned the couple about those rough times right there during the homily. I was so glad he did, because it was honest and real. Comment 3. When I talk to people preparing for marriage, I make them aware that you will have incredible mountaintop experiences during your life together, moments of pure joy and connection that feel transcendent. But you will also, without a doubt, have valley experiences, periods of struggle, sadness, and distance. The most important thing to do when you're down in a valley experience is to consciously remember your past mountaintop experiences. Hold on to them as proof that things can be good again, and use that memory to look forward to the next one, because with work it will come. Comment 4. I truly don't think young couples spend enough time in the early, exciting stages of a relationship finding out about each other's core values and fundamental opinions on life. If their values are compatible, they can grow into adults together and still find themselves in the same frame of mind years down the road. The pastor that married my wife and I did something I'll never forget. In our premarital counseling, he asked each of us what we would bring to the union for our spouse, not what we expected to get from the marriage. It was all about giving, not taking. On another note, it baffles me when I see people all the time that are agonizing over the decision of whether or not to get married, but they already have a child or two together. What the heck? It seems they put more importance and careful thought into the institution of marriage than they did into the irreversible act of creating human children. The priorities seem backward. Comment 5. It really does take two to tango. My soon-to-be ex-husband was unfaithful multiple times. After the first few times, I tried so hard, I poured every ounce of my energy into trying to save the marriage. I suggested therapy, I read books, I tried to be more understanding, but he had already given up. He wasn't interested in fixing what he had broken. So when he was unfaithful the last time, I too gave up. The fight had gone out of me. It was really difficult and strange to talk to him this past weekend and hear him finally, now that it's too late, realize that he didn't think things through. He told me that he misses me, but then said he is happy that I am happier without him, and I really truly am, and I wasn't going to lie about it when he asked me. He is in really rough shape now, emotionally, physically, and financially, but after 10 years of trying to help him and getting absolutely nowhere, I know I just need to let it go and save myself. It still sucks. There's no victory in divorce. Story 4. Not communicating effectively is a huge one. Once you stop talking to each other, really talking, problems will start to fester and grow in the silence. There's also a host of other contributing factors that studies often point to, like being very young when you marry, having a lower education level, a lack of children, cohabitation before marriage, or having previously been through a divorce, or coming from a family with divorced parents. But in my experience and studies, none of these are as directly influential to the success or failure of a marriage as the quality of the couple's communication. You have to talk to your partner. And if you feel like you're not being heard, You have to learn to communicate in a style they can understand and receive. I remember in my studies learning about various frameworks for healthy communication, like the DEAR MAN, Give, and FAST skills, which are basically just structured ways of thinking about how to describe a situation, express your feelings, assert your needs, and negotiate, all while being gentle, fair, and truthful. It's a complex skill that many people are never taught. Edit. My background is a Bachelor of Arts in Human Sexuality and Intimate Relationships, a Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, being a member of Marriage and Family Therapist Associations, and being in training with the Gottman Institute, second edit. Here's some research for those of you who are so butthurt. Comment 1. I'm sure the data is complex, and it's different for everyone, but my husband and I lived together for 4 years before tying the knot, and I'm so incredibly glad that we did. For us, it was 4 years of dealing with most of the mundane, day-to-day stuff that would come with marriage anyway, and the biggest thing for me was that it was kind of a road test for our partnership. We dealt with the grief of losing a loved one, the stress of moving, the challenge of being super poor and counting pennies for groceries, getting laid off from a job, and more. Through all of that, we were still able to communicate effectively and support each other. It definitely confirmed for me that our romantic relationship was anchored by an amazing, resilient friendship. In the end, I thought I'd be a ball of nerves on my wedding day, but the moment I saw my other half waiting for me at the end of the aisle, all my anxiety vanished, and I nearly ran down the aisle to him. Living together let us both know with confidence that taking the next step was just the natural progression for us. On the other hand, I also lived with my ex-husband for a couple of years before we got married, and that relationship went down in spectacular, dramatic flames. So for me, the key takeaway is, your mileage may vary. Comment 2. This makes me feel so good to read. My significant other and I are getting married this coming August. We've been living together for 3 years now, and in that time, we've been through the whole cycle of life's challenges. We've faced unfortunate layoffs, the heartbreaking death of a loved pet, and periods of surviving on nothing but rice and weenies. We've also experienced the joy of clawing our way back, getting stable, and eventually doing well for ourselves. We also had a child during that time, haha. So that definitely adds a whole other layer of complexity and stress to things. It feels like we've already been tested. Comment 3. As a married man who cohabited with his wife before our marriage, I think the correlation with divorce might come down to one of two things. First, there's the my place versus our place issue. Person A moves in with Person B at Person B's apartment. Person B continues to subconsciously consider the apartment to be my place. Then they get married, and Person A now considers it to be our place, but Person B still deep down considers it to be my place. This sorta happened to me early on. My then-girlfriend started spending 95% of her nights at my apartment, but I still thought of it as my place, and would get internally annoyed when she suggested changing things, like the curtains or the layout. The second thing is when moving in together, there can be an unspoken perception of, this is annoying now, but we'll sort it out after we get married. Meanwhile, the other partner thinks the current setup is great and sees absolutely no reason to change what's going on once they get married. This also sorta happened to us after we got our first apartment together after getting engaged. The end result of both these scenarios is really just a fundamental lack of communication, specifically about communicating expectations. I would guess that if you get married first and then move in together, you're forced to hash out those different expectations during the honeymoon period, since you both knew there were going to be a lot of changes and were mentally prepared to make some compromises. Comment 4 number. This is a common misinterpretation of the data. No reputable study anywhere has ever found that there is a direct cause and effect relationship between premarital cohabitation and divorce. What we've found is a correlation, which is very different. In my opinion, this correlation is actually a measurement that both divorce and living together before marriage are more likely to occur due to other underlying factors. In my opinion, The most likely factor is the level of conservative or traditional values of the couple, but it also probably correlates with age and socioeconomic status. Now, if we were able to do a proper study about the overall happiness and satisfaction levels of marriages as related to cohabitation, not just whether they end in divorce, I think we'd find something very interesting. Comment 5. I think many people are very quick to use that correlation as a sign that traditional conservative values are the key to a long-lasting marriage, which is a very weak and biased argument. One of the major reasons it's correlated is simply because of the broader cultural change over the past few decades. Far more people are cohabitating in general now than in previous generations. So it just makes sense that this now common practice would also be present in a higher percentage of modern divorces, acting as a third variable, not a cause. Comment 6, if I recall correctly. More recent research has refined this and found that the risk factor was less about cohabitation itself and more about the fact that the household's finances were often mixed together prematurely. Sharing bank accounts, leases, and other financial obligations created a significant barrier to breaking up for couples who were not actually compatible. This meant that some couples who wouldn't have ordinarily stayed together and gotten married did so because it was just too complicated and expensive to separate. Then, inevitably, they divorced later on. Comment 7. Yes, exactly. Newer studies are now isolating for what you're talking about when it comes to cohabiting. I think they generally refer to it as sliding versus deciding. It's the slide effect. A couple slides into marriage out of convenience or inertia. Their thought process is something like, well, everything's already mixed together, our finances are intertwined, we've already lived together for 5 years, I'd miss out on the cat. So I guess we should just get married. It becomes a why not decision rather than a conscious, deliberate decision to commit to a life together. And those are the couples who tend to be more at risk for divorce than the people who make a clear decision to live together for a set amount of time, with the explicit, shared goal of getting married or separating if it's not the right fit. Story 5. As a divorce attorney, I'm on the front lines of marital collapse. From my perspective, the primary reasons I see for divorce are almost always one of these 4 things. Number 1, domestic violence, which is tragically common. Number 2 is substance abuse, meaning addiction to alcohol or other substances that destroys trust and stability. Number 3 is infidelity. And occasionally, number 4 is severe financial issues, like secret out-of-control spending by one spouse that bankrupts the family. Comment 1. Wow, those are all pretty heavy concrete reasons. I have to say, I'm surprised. I think I expected things like not wanting to be together anymore, and falling out of love to be much more common. Do you think there might be some sort of sampling bias in your experience? For example, is it possible that people are more likely to come to your specific firm if they are going through a highly contentious divorce that involves these more serious issues, as opposed to a more amicable split? Story 6. I do a lot of family law. And if there's one single thing I've learned by practicing in this field for years, especially when there are children involved, it's that most couples who are heading towards divorce really have no idea how much it truly sucks to get a divorce. They are often naive about the reality, all the issues that caused the separation in the first place, like financial problems, deep disagreements over how to parent, or fundamental personality conflicts. Getting a divorce doesn't magically make these issues go away. In fact, in most cases, it makes everything worse. Divorces are incredibly expensive, so now there's even less money to go around. Parenting becomes infinitely more difficult and complicated, with custody schedules and conflicting rules. And on top of it all, everyone gets more emotional, more stressed, and often more petty. The process itself is draining. Honestly, if more people truly understood how emotionally and financially hard divorces really are, there would, in my opinion, be far fewer people who actually get divorced. They might be more motivated to try and fix the problems they have. Comment 1. I don't entirely agree with this, at least not in all aspects. I have personally seen people who get divorced, and as soon as the papers are signed and it goes through, a massive weight of tension just leaves their bodies. They become themselves again. Divorce is, ultimately, as hard and as bitter as the two people involved want to make it. You did make a good point, though, and it touches on something else, I believe. If it took as much effort, paperwork, and money to get married as it does to get divorced, the number of divorces would go way, way down. Comment 2. I saw this exact thing with my own parents. It sucked a lot for everyone while they were in the process of getting divorced. It was a miserable time. But as soon as it was over, it was like they were completely different people. I had never known happy, relaxed versions of them before. It was a weird and sad realization for me that so many of the conflicts I had with my mom, especially throughout my childhood and teenage years, were largely due to the fact that she was absolutely, profoundly miserable in her marriage for my entire life up to that point. In hindsight, I wish I had been easier on her as a kid and a teenager and had more empathy for what she was going through. Story 7. My wife is a therapist, and we're both clergy, so we tend to see relationships from a few different angles, from what I've seen in our work and in our community. There are a few core factors that consistently come into play when marriages fall apart. First is a lack of communication. You have to be able to speak your mind, to share your feelings, wants, and needs, even when it's difficult. Don't let things fester in silence, because resentment is like a poison that builds up over time. Second is a fading sense of self. Don't forget that even though you are a couple, you are also still an individual. You need to take time to be an individual, to have your own hobbies, friends, and passions, just as much as you take the time to be a couple. Without that, you can lose yourself in the relationship. Finally, there is respect. This is the biggest one of them all, the foundation everything else is built on. You must respect your partner as a separate individual who has their own wants, needs, and feelings that are just as valid as your own. Don't dismiss your partner's feelings as silly or unimportant. And don't disrespect their dreams, no matter how different they are from yours. Story 8. I am none of the above, not a counselor, priest, or attorney, but my mother has been married 4 times and divorced 3 times, and I can tell you that the failure of all 3 of those marriages and the current crummy state of her 4th marriage can be traced back to 2 core unshakable ideas she holds. Jesus has a plan for me, and God has made this my destiny. There is simply no getting along with, or having a rational argument with, a woman who has legitimately ended arguments with the phrase, "When you die, you can go talk to Jesus. And he'll tell you that I'm right." She genuinely believes that the creator of all reality will personally step in and magically make her life all hunky-dory, without her having to do any of the hard work of compromise or self-reflection. Nope. Apparently, he's too busy appearing on pieces of toast to help keep my mother's marriages on track. Story 9. The honest, cynical answer for why many of these relationships end is that many states have no-fault divorce laws. This means you can be unfaithful to your spouse, have them divorce you as a result, and then you can still get half of their stuff in the settlement. So why not? And even if you were smart enough to sign a prenuptial agreement, you can often just argue in court that you signed it under emotional duress, and there's a good chance a judge will get it tossed out. For the person behaving badly, it can feel like a situation where you can't lose. Story 10. Man. Reading all of these perspectives, it's clear that everyone's experience and personal tolerance level is different. Everyone's journey through love and commitment will be different, so please don't jump on that person in the comments who said that all marriages should be attempted to be worked out. Don't dismiss them so quickly. Some of us who have been through absolute hell in our relationships and have somehow come out on the other side can see a value and a depth to love that some people have not had the chance to experience yet. I'm still too fresh on the other side of that hell to say with certainty that I would do it all over again, because I'm not sure that I would have the strength. But I can tell you this much. I never ever did I imagine this much love, peace, and devotion was possible from my now safe place on the other side of that pain. When you say in sickness and in health, please be prepared for the type of sickness that is short-term like the flu, and also the ones that are long-term and life-altering. The kind of sickness that changes your entire future, derails all your plans and wishes, and reshapes everything about your life, all for one person's benefit, and it's not yours. Reading these comments from people about other people's marriages, I just want to say that a marriage is a sacred private place with its own secrets and pain and happiness that are not always evident to everyone looking in from the outside. There are so many more layers to what you see superficially. The people on the Dead Bedrooms subreddit. I've been there and it's a terrible, lonely place. Those hidden layers are why people stay, even when the pain they feel is greater than their happiness, but everyone eventually has a limit.